why should women cover their head? We find this portion in 1 Corinthians 11:10. The verse says in New Living Translation, "For this reason and because the angels are watching, a woman should wear a covering on her head to show she is under authority." So the first question is, should women be covering their head? Paul says yes. And he also gives a reason for that in the previous verses 3 to 10. And it says that in verse 10, women ought to have a symbol of authority on her head. It is not an option, it is an obligation, it is a constraint. But this constraint is placed on the woman not at all times when she is in public, but while she is praying and prophesying. The reasons usually you will hear regarding this is because it was the culture at that point of time that women have to cover their head when they are in public as a sign of submission and order. And if she does not do so, she is considered as an immoral woman, because only the prostitutes in those days would come in the public without covering their head. There is another view that because of the fallen angels that we find in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 6, in order to protect themselves, women ought to cover their head. But I reject both these reasons, because Paul here clearly talks about covering the head only while praying and prophesying, and not at all times when they are in public. So it does not mean that the fallen angels, if they were to attack a woman, either spiritually or physically, would be only when she is in praying or prophesying. It will be at all times. And likewise, a Christian woman or a believer is not expected to show herself as a woman with chastity only during praying and prophesying, but at all times. And the reason that Paul is giving is found in verses 3 to 12, that there are these notions of order. And he supports that reason with a few pointers, a couple of pointers there. In verses 14 and 15, he says, nature itself shows that women have long hair, which is equivalent to a covering. And hence, nature indicates that women need to cover their head, while men have short hair, and hence nature indicates that women need to cover their head, while men have short hair, hence men do not have to cover their head. The point that Paul is talking is that this is an indicator for us to realize that men do not need to cover their head and women need to cover their head. But what the contemporary church has done is saying that long hair itself is a covering and hence you don't need to cover their head. But that is not the point what Paul is saying. That is quite contrary to the argument that Paul is placing in this particular portion. So covering is required while women are praying and prophesying. It's an obligation, a constraint placed by Paul on women. And another pointer that he says to support his argument is that this is the common practices in the Church of God at that point of time. So what is the notions of order that Paul is talking about? He's talking about the cosmos order, the order of hierarchy or authority in the cosmos or in the world. In verses 3 and 7 talks about the chain of command, where man is the head of a woman and Christ is the head of man and God is the head of Christ. So man is the image and the glory of God, whereas woman is the glory of man. In order to show this hierarchy has been accepted by the woman covers her head, whereas the man need not cover his head. And in verse 5, it talks about that when a woman does not cover her head, she is bringing dishonor to her head, that is the man. Why is loose hair considered to be a dishonor? It is not because of the loose hair itself, but because of what it communicates. The general Jewish understanding at that point of time was a woman, if she is found with loose hair in the temple area, she was being suspected of immoral character. We find that in Numbers 5:18, where the woman suspected of cheating her husband had to be put through a ritual of test for unfaithfulness that begins with the priest uncovering her head. So she might not have done that immoral act, but she has been accused of that immoral act, which itself was a shame in the society. And Paul also says that the chronological order of creation also supports this point of view that man is the head of woman, where he says in verses 8 and 9 that woman was created for man and not vice versa. After establishing this chain of command, Paul also writes that in verse 10, because of this chain of command, and on account of the angels, the woman has to cover her head. Why would it be so? We already saw that it is not in relevance to the account that we find in Genesis chapter 6 regarding the fallen angels marrying the women or the daughters of men. But it is related to this hierarchy or the chain of command that Paul is talking here, where he says the lack of order or authority that is displayed by the woman by her act of not covering her head will be an offense to the angels in heaven who are also worshipping God in heaven. So the common understanding that at that point of time and even now is that while we are worshipping, we are not worshipping alone as 2 people, 3 people alone, or in a congregation of 100 or maybe 1,000 in a stadium. We are worshipping God along with the people here and with the angels that are in heaven. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 22 says that you have come to myriads of angels in joyful assembly. So when we are worshipping God, you need to have this understanding that it is not here only on earth. We have joined with the heavenly host worshipping God who is there in heaven. And if that is the case, we should not be a stumbling block to the angels that are there. Why is it so? Because 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 3 says that we are to judge angels. At some point of time in the future when Jesus returns, we are going to reign along with him. And the verse says that we are going to judge even angels. Psalm 8 verse 4 to 6 also supports this point of view, where it says that mankind has been made little lower than the angels for a little while. But at a future point of time, we are going to be there along with Christ ruling over the world, and we are to judge even angels. So right now, when we are actually worshipping God, and if we are going to display disregard for authority, they will say, are these the people who are going to judge us in the future? So that is an offense to the angels and a stumbling block to them. So it is a simple act of showing that you are submitting to the authority that has been placed by God over you. Hope this clarifies and answers your question. God bless you.